Hey folks, so a couple of days ago I came across this article which talks about using diffuser models like Stable Diffusion along with ControlNet to generate artistic QR codes. It was first posted on Reddit by a user on r/Stable Diffusion forum, but StableDiffusionArt.com has picked up and written a great article on it. So I thought I'd replicate it and try to make some other articles and tell you how to go about it and go through the entire process of generating QR codes and how to go about all of this. We'll be using a couple of tools that are defined in this article as well and some additional tools as well. So first of all, we would be utilizing the Stable Diffusion Web UI by Automatic 1111. This has a one-click installer for almost all the operating systems. We are using Windows today, but essentially they have single line install for almost every operating system. It's a simple command line installation for all of these, and it downloads the models automatically as well. We would be using some custom models, which we would get to, but the base models will be downloaded automatically using this web UI as well, and it helps us use Stable Diffusion through web UI instead of having to write a lot of command line code. The next thing we'll be using is ControlNet, which is a neural network that guides our Stable Diffusion and diffuser models into generating images based on certain predefined image or predefined inputs that are given to the ControlNet as well as the Stable Diffusion. So this will also, there are different types of control nets. The two types of control nets that we'll be using today are tile based and depth based. We'll get to it in details when we come to the control net section in our practical examples. But essentially, it guides our output from Stable Diffusion into certain types of images that are supposed to be generated. Now, there are different types of ControlNet installations or how to go about it. But essentially, since we are using Automatic 1111's installer for Stable Diffusion, we'll use the extension for ControlNet for the same web UI. There's a article on StableDiffusionArt.com again, where they tell you how to go through Stable Diffusion installation ControlNet for web UI. All of these links would be there in the description. You can go ahead and you can go through all the steps on how to install all of these elements on your system. Again, we will not be using the default Stable Diffusion model that we have that are given by the Stable Diffusion community, but we will be using some other open source model called GhostMix. It is trained on or fine-tuned on certain design aspects of image generation that are preferred by a lot of people, mostly animated and cartoon type of images, not photorealistic images. If you prefer photorealistic images, you can go with the default model, but this is completely a personal choice as to what kind of image generation you want. You can also prompt it the way you want it, but essentially by default, GhostMix model tends towards animated and non-photorealistic images. For starters, we would start off by generating a simple QR code. I would prefer 34qr.com for this because it generates a QR code that has white borders. You can go with any QR code generator you want, but one thing to keep in mind is have a high fault tolerance on your QR code generation. So even if there are images getting superimposed on top of it, we will have some form of fault tolerance for the for the scanners to neglect. Some of the examples that I have already generated are here. So we can see that there is a white background on top of which there is a QR code. So this is a completely scannable QR code that goes to my portfolio site, but there are different examples as well. Again, so this is again a fully functional QR code that can be scanned. There are many different types of QR codes that you can generate based on how you want to prompt your image generation, and which kind of ControlNet images you're using. So for example, this is a QR code generated by using the depth of the famous painting called the Great Wave of Kanagawa, which is where it picks up the design cues from and generates this fully functional QR code. Now, if we come back to our example, we will download a PNG of this QR code. I've already downloaded it. The smaller the QR code text, the better it is usually. If you go a little longer, then you might have to do it multiple times to get a QR code that is working, because that's more information to be added into the QR code. And the more information you have in the QR code, the more information you might lose out on when there is other images coming on top of it, or being generated through tiling of this on top of those diffuser models. So let's come to our Stable Diffusion dashboard. This is again the automatic 1111's Stable Diffusion web UI. Before we start, we will go into the extensions and we will install the Stable Diffusion web UI ControlNet extension according to this article that's mentioned here. And once we do that, inside our Stable Diffusion web UI, we can see our ControlNet pane in text to image and image to image sections. So there's a ControlNet section defined here, which we'll be using in image to image. But text to image we can utilize to generate base images or base design cues that we want. But this is not necessary. If you already have an image in mind for a design cue, you can directly utilize that. But I utilize it to generate basic design cues. I start off with batch size 8 because then it's 8. I can find which I prefer top of this. And once you generate, it will start generating images. So now this process completely depends on the kind of hardware that you have, and if you have GPUs. If you have GPUs, then it's usually faster. Running it on CPU might take longer. Okay, so now the processing is complete and we have all the images that are being generated. We can select any one for our design queue. I prefer something like this where there are a lot of houses. So I would copy this image, or I will save this image and I'll come to image. Now this is where our ControlNet will start on takeover and have our image generated. So we would utilize 2 units of ControlNet. We will come to the first unit in some time, but for now we will paste our image in ControlNet unit 2, and we will be utilizing a depth-based ControlNet here. So what a depth-based ControlNet does is it understands the depth of this image based on the edges of the image. So if we look at the depth mapping of this image, there would be these huts in the forefront while this mountain in the background, and it will try to pick up on the depth of this image and superimpose that depth on top of our image being generated. For the image to be generated in design cues of this, so this will be our baseline image from which we will get our design cues, and it will infill and it will add all that data and generate the image based on the prompt that we write here. Now I've kept the same prompt here and here, but that doesn't mean that the image being generated will be the same, because it's always because our random seed is -1, so it always generates images randomly. But it will pick up design cues from this, and it will try to be as close to this as possible. We will try to enable this ControlNet unit, and we will keep all of these fields as they are. So starting control step is when we are running it for n number of epochs. When does the design or the this ControlNet come into play? We will start off from 0% epoch, so from the starting epoch itself, and the ending epoch would be 1. So it will run for the entire number of epochs that we have. So this will be contributing to our results in every step of our image generation. Coming to ControlNet Unit 0, this is where we will upload our QR code. And this will be a tile-based ControlNet. Now, how tile differs from depth-based is, as I mentioned, depth-based will give it essentially a depth mapping of the image, while tile will try to tile that image on top of the image being generated. So this will have more impact towards the data that is being generated or the image that is being generated. So the output will look closer to this, while it will have design aspects picked up from this. Tile-based mapping is again, it's more computationally expensive than depth-based mapping, but it ensures that the output looks more like this, or have a controlled output that comes towards this. Here, since I mentioned tile-based render, first is computationally expensive, and if we keep tile weight really high, in that case, it will try to be close to this, and it will not go into designing other aspects of the images. So the kind of metadata or the hyperparameters that I have come across that work in most of the cases is having a control weight of 0.87, starting control step of around 0.2. So it will start off from the 20. So the first 20% of the epochs, this will not be a part of the image being generated. This will have no impact on the image being generated. The ending control step, I would like to keep it at around 0.9. Some of the other hyperparameters that are supposed to be checked here, first of all, our base image again would be the same QR code that we have. And the sampling steps, I usually keep it at above 50. Let's start off with 100. The total number of sampling steps is the total number of epochs that it goes through before generating the final image. One more thing here is denoising strength. So this gives more creativity, if I have to talk it in layman terms, but essentially if you have denoising strength high, then it will generate more artistic or more creative results. While if your denoising strength is low, it will create images that closely resemble the base image. I like to start off around 0.7. This is a good baseline for denoising strength. If your QR codes are not being interpreted in the final result, then you can reduce your denoising strength, or you can increase the impact of ControlNet Unit 0. If your QR codes are, if your image is predominantly just QR codes and no artistic unit is coming from the ControlNet Unit 1, since this is already so basically we can see that the image is being generated here, and there are 3 total images that we see here. This is our depth map, which comes from the control unit 1, or the second control unit, because the indexing starts from 0. This generates the depth mapping, and this is the tile image, which comes from our ControlNet Unit 0. This will be tiled on top of our image that is being generated. Finally, this is the image that gets generated, and the output comes as a scannable QR code that takes data from the design cues from the depth image, while the tile gets tile from the QR code image. One more thing that we can talk about here is increasing the denoising strength. Once we increase the denoising strength, it will try to generate a more artistic view. So having higher denoising strength gives it more freedom to go beyond the ControlNet images that are being given to it. So we can see that the process has started. Another change that I had done here was increase the dimensions from 512 by 512 to 762 by 782 by 782. Sorry, 786 by 786. That will give our images more resolution, and it will create bigger images. So now we can see that it starts off with the depth mapping. So it takes that depth map because the depth map starts from the first epoch and goes to the last epoch, while our tiling starts from the 20th percent epoch. So basically, the first 20% epochs will not have that tile data, and that image will come on top of it when that step is encountered. So you can see that the tiling image has come on top of it as it is. So this data will be present up until the 90th epoch, since we have 100 sampling steps here. So 90% epoch, which is the 90th epoch, this tiling data will be present on top of it, and it will guide the image generation based on the prompt. So finally, this image has been generated. Now you can see this is a bit more artistic image because we had increased our diffuser strength. Or our denoising strength, sorry. So this looks a bit more blended in. It is still readable because the QR code is still very prominent in this. One more thing that we can do here is try to send it to InPaint. So what happens in InPaint is we can mask out certain fields of our image. So let's assume these look very QR code type data, where on the corners, let's mask these out, and it will, and if we try to generate it, it will try to infill these parts of our image and try to tweak the image a little bit again. So now if we are trying to generate it, it will be generated based on this image instead of our starting QR code. So now we can see that the final image that is being generated has a bit more blended in nature with the existing image that was there. And the QR codes also have tried to blend in into our basic color scheme and natural surrounding. Again, this is a working QR code. If we want, we can increase our denoising strength again to make it a bit more realist image based. So let's try that now. So we can have a denoising strength of 0.9 and we can test with that. So here we can see that the final image being generated is more artistic now. It is a working QR code, so you can scan it as well, and it is fully functioning as well. Now, as I mentioned, the smaller the QR code, the better chances of success you might have. With bigger QR codes, you have more freedom of having more artistic images as well, but it has issues with the accuracy as well. So you might come across some situations where your QR codes will not scan. In that case, you can decrease your denoising strength or increase the weightage of your tiling control unit. But it's again a game of trial and error, and you might come across some cases where it will work. Some of the other, so once you have this image, you can directly save this image, or you can save it here, which will go into the default directly of your log images, which is defined in the settings page. Some other examples of images that were being generated using this tools again. So these are fully functioning QR codes here, which are being designed using the same tools. and these can be utilized in a number of places where you can have certain sort of advertisements or other forms of design-based outreach using the QR codes. Thanks.